Here my focus, and this session, our focus and also my focus would be on transport connectivity. Why we are talking about why you need transport connectivity? Because better connectivity increases our competitiveness. It also increases our trade, and it also reduces our trade cost. Thereby it promotes our economic growth, our social integration, and also overall economic development. And in this globalized world, it also promotes trade in parts and trade in trust, and helps to integrate in the global value chain. And the fourth, it also enhances human development within the country and within the region by allowing people to have better access to job, to have better access to education, to have better access to health facilities. And for BIMSTEC countries, it has additional dimension, and it could serve as a bridge between South and Southeast Asia. So because of the importance of this transport connectivity, BIMSTEC already had taken some initiative, and His Excellency already highlighted many of the initiatives. BIMSTEC Master Plan for Transport Connectivity, it has already adopted, and BIMSTEC Agreement on Maritime Transport is already concluded. But other initiatives that Agreement on Trade in Goods of the Framework Agreement of BIMSTEC FTA is under negotiation. Again, Agreement on Service, Trade in Service under negotiation. Investment is still under negotiation, and customs matter is still under negotiation. Rules of origin and is still negotiation. And trade facilitations, ADB has prepared the master plan, but is still under negotiations. And I hope, all these initiatives will not have the fate of BIMSTEC FTA. We are still negotiating. I think we're negotiating for the last 18 years and without any conclusion. Okay, let me touch upon the state of connectivity, particularly here infrastructure and their efficiency. Road infrastructure, road density is highest in Bangladesh, followed by India, and the lowest is in Myanmar. But the quality of infrastructure is quite low, compared to OECD countries, and the quality is lowest in Nepal. And regarding length of railroads, it's impressive. India has got impressive length, but Bhutan, there is no rail linkage. Again, if we look at the efficiency of rail services, lowest efficiency in Thailand, followed by Bangladesh, but India has quite good efficiency in train services. Maritime connectivity has improved significantly in India and Sri Lanka compared to 2006. I've got this data from UNCTAD, and it provides in relation to 2006. But seaport efficiency are above average. I congratulate our chairman, and India has the highest efficiency in the seaport. And regarding air transport, particularly I was measured in terms of air transport registered departure worldwide, and it's quite impressive, air connectivity for most of the BIMSTEC countries. And its efficiency as air transport service, it is also above average for Thailand and India. It's quite impressive. And regarding digital connectivity, Bangladesh has the highest digital connectivity. That's followed by Bhutan. I have measured in terms of percentage of populations having access or using internet. And overall, if you look at overall transport infrastructure, is better in India compared to other countries, but remain substantially below those of the OECD or developed countries. Okay, I mean, this is the state of, I mean, hard infrastructure, and let's look at the state of outcome, I mean, particularly mechanism. Well, for, I mean, many issues, I mean, there is lack of data, and I could not gather, I mean, all those informations, but here I have collected information on intra-regional on trade. Well, intra-regional trade is low, that's compared to other regional group, but its good point is, I mean, good news is it's increasing over the period. Here I have provided information on 2010, 15, 19, and 21, and gradually it's increasing within the BIMSTEC region. And if you look at the foreign direct investment stock, that's low in Bhutan and Nepal, but it's quite high. I mean, 540 billion, that's the stock in 2021. In India and Thailand, it's 279 billion US dollar. That's the inward, but outward is FDI. I mean, there is no outward FDI from Nepal and Bhutan, but the highest is in India and followed by Thailand. Why I mean, here my argument is the outward flow of BIMSTEC countries, the outward FDI flow of BIMSTEC country doesn't match with the inward flow of the BIMSTEC country. That means BIMSTEC countries are investing in other countries rather than in BIMSTEC member countries. Okay, it's my, I mean, here, I mean, overall, I mean, our mechanism as well as instrument for connectivity, particularly transport connectivity, that is low compared to OECD or other developed countries. And here, our colleague from ADV, he talked about transport master plan, and also, I mean, they have already prepared the state facilitations master plan. So what are the key, I mean, concern from the perspective, I mean, overall as well as and from the perspective of landlocked countries like Nepal and Bhutan? I just want to highlight, I mean, 3 issues. The first issue is governance. I mean, here, okay, we can have infrastructure, but we have to focus on the governance, I mean, of the system. First, we need to harmonize our transport procedure and regulations. I mean, that our trade facilitations and master plan talks about. And another important is the use of appropriate technology. For example, single window, our chair, he talked about, I mean, every time single window, but and another, I mean, while this custom clearance, that's risk management, electronic data transfer. In fact, Nepal and India, Nepal is using ISCS-MEA and India is having different, I mean, package. So there is problem in this data, electronic data transfer. So maybe we need to harmonize, I mean, that system. And most important is we should not use digital technology to record our information. Rather, we should use to automate the process. That is the key. And another issue is better management of custom border infrastructure, such as, I mean, particularly in custom clearance. And much more important is capacity building of the authorities, including, I mean, that is the most important, that the change in mindset of the government official, and particularly in the specific transport sector, as well as in border management. And the second is greenhouse gas emission. I mean, in fact, if you look at the global data, transport is responsible for about 1/4 of energy-related CO2 emission. So if we talk about this connectivity and transport development, transport connectivity, I think we need to keep in our mind about the greenhouse gas emission. So for this, we need to have better design and maintenance of the transport infrastructure. In fact, we BIMSTEC countries are lacking on the maintenance part of our infrastructure. Another is operational efficiency, route optimization, and importantly, technological innovations. That's the cost-effective and efficient transport technology, greenhouse technology for power and energy. It's not only this transport technology, but also green transport technology, but also the source of energy that has to be green. And also important is our communication network. And the third concern that is particularly of landlocked countries like Nepal and Bhutan, and I think we have to address the cost of being landlocked. And if you look at the available literature, because of lack of direct access to sea, transport cost for landlocked country is about 50% higher than the coastal countries. And average freight and insurance costs are at approximately 14% of their import value, whereas it is just 7% for other developed countries. And landlocked countries trade less, on average 30% than coastal countries. And the third, landlocked country experience weaker growth than maritime countries. Being landlocked reduces average growth by about 1.5%. That's the study done by Bloom and Williamson. And another issue is landlocked countries are more vulnerable to external shocks compared to coastal countries. These are the cost of being landlocked. So in our transport connectivity, how can we address this concern of landlocked countries? The first and foremost is ensuring freedom of transit. And that has to be based on Article 5 of the GATT and also 1958 Geneva Convention on IC, and it was further developed in 1982. And the second could be support in development of transport infrastructure. Our revenue base is low, and recently because of COVID and all these things, that's our debt GDP ratio is increasing. And we have low inward FDI flows. And that provides limited opportunity for this public-private partnership. Both our chair already highlighted it, and particularly infrastructure. And another support is basically on the transfer of technology. That is another area, we need some support. And the third is there has to be supportive regional transport infrastructure. If you want to have access to sea, maybe we need to use infrastructure, maybe Indian infrastructure or Bangladesh infrastructure. So that infrastructure needs to be supported. Okay, with this, I stop over here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey. That was indeed enlightening. You have really given us a South India watch of where we stand on the various efficiency parameters in the various modes of transport. I think that's lessons for all of us, how we are able to take some of these things forward to be comparable to the best in the world. The other challenges that you mentioned with respect to landlocked status, I'm sure connectivity which we are able to establish through a joint effort is going to be beneficial for everyone. And as was mentioned by Dr. Kabir, access to some of the ports and the related infrastructure linkages, I'm sure is going to be absolutely in the direction of the international conventions, the law of the seas and other things that you mentioned. The challenges of harmonization and digital connectivity has been certainly a challenge. And while the maritime single window of the IMO gives the uniform formats on which data exchange and information exchange can take place between the various stakeholders, there's a new unified logistic interface platform which we are attempting to create, where the interface between various stakeholders for a logistics supply chain end to end, there would be all kinds of people who would be there. And to be able to bring them on board on a common platform, the Unified Logistics Interface Platform, ULIP, has now been, we now have that in place, where various stakeholders can exchange information with each other seamlessly using APIs. The technology today permits the interface to be seamless and without any delay, and this platform will make it possible. For us, we have the Maritime Logistics portal, Marine, which would provide interface with this portal on real-time basis to all the stakeholders who are interested in adding value to the supply chain. The goods, when they move across the border, the other stakeholders from across the border can also integrate with that, so that we have one mechanism where everyone can exchange information, documents, and be able to make things seamlessly go through. So I think the work has started, and we again, when we talk of the implementation plan, further detailing on this could be thought of. We have now from the BIMSTEC Secretariat itself, Mr. Hussain, Mohammed Hussain ji, who I'm sure would be able to really guide us on the various kind of challenges which some of our speakers have just mentioned. Thank you. Over to you.
Distinguished Chair, fellow panelists, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and a very good afternoon to you all. It is a privilege and great honor for me to participate in the ISCS-MEA Collaborative second conference on BIMSTEC 25 years of driving force behind neighborhood cooperation, and having the opportunity to speak as one of the panelists of the session titled BIMSTEC Strengthening Regional Solidarity Through Transport Connectivity. I would like to thank the Institute of Social and Cultural Studies for inviting the BIMSTEC Secretariat to speak on this subject. I wish to record our deep appreciation to ISCS for taking great interest in the activities of BIMSTEC and for the hard work that has been put into in organizing this conference. Distinguished audience, well-established transport connectivity in any region plays a pivotal role to the advancement of economic development and ultimately the regional solidarity. Over the last 25 years, the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multisectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, which you know as BIMSTEC, has emerged primarily as a regional organization to strengthen the economic and physical connectivity in the region through more trade, investment, travel, and exchanges by leveraging geographical advantage and available resources. BIMSTEC, as a unique regional organization that acts as a bridge between 5 South Asian countries and 2 Southeast Asian countries, has appeared to be a hope for economic integration of the Bay of Bengal region. As the BIMSTEC member states have enormous potential in terms of population, resources, as well as market growth, I will underscore the importance of transport connectivity in fostering regional development and solidarity with the context of the Bay of Bengal region. It will mainly highlight the endeavors of BIMSTEC with a particular focus on transport connectivity, which can create an impact on the economic development and regional solidarity. While I am happy to share that BIMSTEC perspective on enhancing connectivity in the Bay of Bengal region, I also look forward to the opportunity of learning about the various connectivity initiatives in the South and Southeast Asian regions and beyond from the learned speakers. Distinguished audience, promotion of physical and economic connectivity is at the heart of BIMSTEC activities. Historically, the Bay of Bengal used to be the center of global trade and commerce and the hub of economic and cultural exchanges. One of the objectives of the BIMSTEC is to revive the historical connectivity in the present-day context. Keeping this in mind, connectivity has always been at the forefront of BIMSTEC's agenda. As a very first initiative, Asian Development Bank carried out the BIMSTEC Transport Infrastructure and Logistics Study, BTILS, in the BIMSTEC member states in 2017. And it was for the period from 2007 to 2014. And in 2014, a follow-up updating and enhancement of the BIMSTEC Transport Infrastructure and Logistics Study for the period of 2014 to 18 was commissioned to address the significant progress that had been achieved throughout the transport environment since the original study was undertaken. However, the member state felt the necessity of having a comprehensive master plan as various other initiatives with overlapping domain has been initiated in the region. As a result, the 5th BIMSTEC Summit held in March last year in Colombo adopted the BIMSTEC Master Plan for Transport Connectivity with a vision to promote seamless connectivity between and across BIMSTEC countries through the use of different transport modes and to achieve enhanced transport and trade linkages for faster and more inclusive growth. The BIMSTEC Master Plan for Transport Connectivity provides the framework for organizing a set of policies, strategies, and projects towards realizing a shared vision of peace, prosperity, and sustainability, in other words, regional solidarity. Distinguished audience, the master plan comprises proposal including a 10-year strategy from 2018 to 2028, an action plan for improving transport linkages covering both hard and soft infrastructure, including physical roads, railways, ports, inland waterways, and airports and soft infrastructure. It also includes capacity building, transport access agreements, and the harmonization of rules, regulation policies, and measures related to transport between and among BIMSTEC countries with a view to facilitating the cross-border movement of BIMSTEC trade in support of the BIMSTEC free trade area. I'd like to inform that the BIMSTEC Master Plan has identified 267 projects which will enhance the connectivity in the Bay of Bengal region at an estimated cost of US $125 billion over the 10 years from 2018 to 2028. Out of 268 projects, a study has prioritized 141 flagship projects at an estimated cost of 47 billion. However, it will require commitment from the member state, international development partners, and private sectors to implement projects identified in the master plan. Support will be required from donors as well as efforts from the respective governments to carry out necessary reforms and capacity developments. In pursuance to the financing issue of the projects, ADB has carried out a detailed study on financing transport connectivity infrastructure in the BIMSTEC region, which will be published soon. This study assessed the financing of landscape for national and regional transport infrastructure projects in the BIMSTEC region. The study also covers three categories of finance: public funding, commercial financing, and private sector participation. Distinguished audience, with regard to the connectivity of the region, the BIMSTEC is not only limited to conducting analytical studies and master plan. BIMSTEC has also made considerable progress in laying down institutional frameworks or legal instruments to intensify regional solidarity through strengthening physical connectivity. The leaders during the 5th BIMSTEC Summit resolved to intensify regional economic and physical connectivity to enhance regional trade, investment, tourism, technology, energy, and other forms of exchanges. The Honorable Prime Minister of India, His Excellency Sri Narendra Modi, during his speech in the 5th BIMSTEC Summit, aptly stated that, and I quote, "The mainstay of better integration, better trade, and better people-to-people relations between us is better connectivity," unquote. What could be the better way to articulate the importance of transport connectivity for regional solidarity? The leaders at the 5th BIMSTEC Summit underlined the importance of multidimensional connectivity, which promotes synergy among connectivity framework in our region as a key enabler to economic integration for shared prosperity. One of the key directives pertaining to connectivity was to conclude the BIMSTEC Motor Vehicle Agreement for the regulation of passenger, personnel, and cargo vehicular traffic between and among BIMSTEC member states. You will be happy to learn that member states have agreed to negotiate both the BIMSTEC Framework Agreement on transit, transshipment, and movement of vehicular traffic between and among BIMSTEC member countries, as well as the BIMSTEC motor vehicle agreements for regulation of the passenger, personal, and cargo vehicular traffics between and among BIMSTEC member states simultaneously. It is expected that the second meeting of the BIMSTEC working group on the motor vehicle agreement to be hosted by India in the second quarter of this year will be able to discuss and finalize the BIMSTEC motor vehicle agreement for the regulation of passenger, personnel, and cargo vehicular traffic between and among the BIMSTEC member states. Nonetheless, the most important achievement has been made with regard to maritime connectivity due to member states' renewed attention in the post-COVID-19 pandemic period. You will be pleased to know that the agreement for maritime transport cooperation among the BIMSTEC member states has been approved by the 19th BIMSTEC ministerial meeting held in Bangkok, Thailand on 9th of March 2023, and it is expected to be signed during the 6th BIMSTEC summit to be held later this year in Bangkok. Once the agreement is implemented, it will be a game changer for the region as it will facilitate movement of cargo vessels within 20 nautical miles from the coast to enhance maritime transport connectivity in the region, avoiding high cost and congestion associated with land transport connectivity between these two thriving regions. Distinguished audience, growth and prosperity in the BIMSTEC region require tangible progress in transport connectivity, among others. We need to work together closely to promote sustainable transport networks, while governments of the BIMSTEC member states can create the environment for growth in the region. Huge investment has to come from the private sectors. I hope the business leaders will take note of the huge investment potential that is expected to come up to the BIMSTEC region in near future and will become partners in BIMSTEC growth. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sri Mushaffar Hussain ji from BIMSTEC. I think you very clearly highlighted the fact that Bay of Bengal was the center for economic activity in the region. And if you're able to restore that, redeem that past glory, get back those old connections, I think the BIMSTEC agenda would be largely taken care of. And to make it happen, you talked of the master plan and the financing arrangement. In the financing arrangement, the various options that are there, I think it's time that we are able to have a concrete plan. And as was mentioned right in the beginning, that if we have the user fees also as an important ingredient in getting these projects financed, all the stakeholders come on board, the quality is ensured, the efficiencies kick in. And that we have found as a model which can possibly be replicated. It's been done for the road sector in India, we've done it for the ports. And that has resulted in some of the things which Dr. Pandey showed in the slide. And with the kind of growth and the expectation people have in this region, I'm sure it's time that the scarcity of funds that we talked of infrastructure projects can become a thing of the past. And the people, the trade, the users expect quality infrastructure. And for that, I'm sure they would be willing to pitch in up to some extent. And if we're able to get them partnered through whatever model that we are able to adopt, I think the things that we have on the table will take off very quickly. And what we have in the ground would be far more effective and quality kind of outcomes. So that is one thought that I had based on what we have experienced. I think we will, and you said that the new agreement which has just been concluded on the maritime cooperation is going to be a game changer. I think I'll talk of that in my concluding comments, because I also personally think that while the road and rail infrastructure, getting things on the ground in terms of getting the prerequisites in place takes a bit of a time. But out in the open, the resources which are a common good, the vessels can move across the waters without any hindrance. And if you're able to perfect that, many of the connectivity challenges that we have would get automatically get resolved in a manner which is greener, more efficient, and the world has been used to it. So that is going to be a game changer, and I suppose if you have an implementation plan for that, we are halfway there. We have Dr. Constantino Xavier from the Center for Social and Economic Progress. I'm sure he'll be able to tie up many of the thoughts which have come from the distinguished panelists here. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjeev Ranjan. I'll try my best in bringing all this together. But my special thanks to the Institute for Social and Cultural Studies, the Ministry of External Affairs, for bringing us all here together to Kolkata for this important conference. I think Arindamji had said in reference to Kolkata that this is the cultural capital of India. Since this is such a wonderful land that has never been in the way of ambition and vision, let me upgrade that and propose that Kolkata should actually also strive to become the connectivity capital of India. This is traditionally a city that has been deeply tied to the Bay of Bengal, to the Himalayas, to the Eurasian hinterland, to the Indian Ocean region, to Southeast Asia and East Asia. So certainly this is, if not one among, but certainly the most propitious place for us to discuss connectivity. And hopefully Kolkata can reclaim that role it has played historically over centuries and millennia as a connectivity hub for Asia. I think in 4 points, I'll try to share some of the work that we've been doing at the Center for Social and Economic Progress, where I work in New Delhi, where I lead the Sambandh initiative for regional connectivity. In some ways, it builds on what my esteemed panelists have shared already from different vantage points and perspectives, different geographies, different countries from across this region and beyond. But let me make these 4 points in 3 minutes each. Number one, we are reversing gears in this region, and we are now not only building connectivity, but we are actually trying to correct the connectivity gaps that have been built and deepened over decades. In the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, for 40 to 50 long years, the entire world was focused on interdependence, connectivity, and regions coming together. That is the history of the European Union, with all its benefits that are obvious today. That is the history of Southeast Asia, that despite great power conflict, worked under the US-China umbrella to come together and develop common markets and build regional integration across Southeast Asia. And a very diverse region. When we speak of Southeast Asia and ASEAN, it sounds very normal today. But in the 1960s, these were countries that were at war with each other, that had invaded each other, that had fought against each other. Today, we speak of ASEAN as a given of regional integration. South America, parts of Africa, North America, East Asia, the history of those 40 to 50 years is one of coming together of integration. In this region, the exact reverse happened. From the 1950s until the 1990s, by any absolute indicator of connectivity, interdependence, the region was coming apart. South Asia, if you want to call it the Bay of Bengal region, was coming apart. Not only was there a lack of investment in managing connectivity, there was actually investment in building barriers to connectivity, in building border fences, in disconnecting trade, in hindering mobility between these countries in the region, the so-called BIMSTEC region or Bay of Bengal region, right? So you were reversing, you were going against the trend of history, and that is the legacy of disconnectivity. That is the legacy and the obstacles of history that now are being corrected. But it's important because it's a formidable baggage that we have on our shoulders. It's a formidable history of problems, obstacles, barriers that now are being dismantled after having been erected for 40, 50 years. And that's why that's the priority and the urgency of mobility. And mobility begins first and foremost with transportation connectivity. We can be connected through the minds, through beautiful texts, values, spiritual ideas, language, etc. But the history of humanity shows that you will see convergence where there is facility of mobility, of goods, of people, of actual physical linkages that allow people to come together. It could be a bridge, it could be a port, it could be a road, it could be an urban center. So therefore, today we can only think of common markets if we achieve the linkages, the ties, the transportation corridors, the basics, the fundamental basics of physical mobility of people and goods through different vehicles, whether it's through the waters, through the air, or through land. So that is point number one. Point number two, there is now a huge political will to change this legacy and to correct this legacy. That's why we're living in a very interesting time, and I think that's why we are here today. That's why we're talking about BIMSTEC, which had fallen off the radar for 10, 15 years. That's why we're talking about connectivity in the Bay of Bengal region. That's why we're talking about the Bay of Bengal region being, for example, what is now called, at the heart of what is now called the Indo-Pacific region. That's why we have initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, focused on also connectivity. That's why we have the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework now being pushed in the region to talk about connectivity to trade, transportation, etc. So there is now political will, initiative, interest across the board to correct that gap that we ourselves have carved or dug ourselves into. BIMSTEC in itself, let me remind you and take you back to 1997 in Bangkok. BIMSTEC was created not necessarily as a regional institution. If you look at the founding document of BIMSTEC, it refers to it as a sub-regional mechanism. Why sub-regional or inter-regional, sometimes also used for BIMSTEC in 97? Because in 97 you had just had Myanmar join ASEAN a few years later. You had ASEAN consolidating itself. You had a history on this side of the region, in South Asia and the subcontinent, of South Asian regionalism picking up in the 1990s because of the economic opening of all of the South Asian economies post-91. But between those two hubs, South and Southeast Asia, there was a need for an institutional linkage, for a connection between South and Southeast Asia. BIMSTEC was that response in 97. It was seen as a bridge institution, as a linkage institution that was going to connect South to Southeast Asia. Today we speak of it as a region, and in many ways the Bay of Bengal region was a region in its own right for much of history. But I see it more in its institutional manifestation of BIMSTEC as a linkage space between South and Southeast Asia. This is when Thailand had its Look West policy. This is when Myanmar was seeing itself as a land bridge, still does, between South and Southeast Asia. This is when Sri Lanka saw an opportunity to finally play that bridging maritime role that it had come from the 1970s in Sri Lanka, that Sri Lanka was going to be a maritime link between South Asia and the southern South Asian markets of South India and Sri Lanka with Southeast Asian markets and Singapore in particular. This is when Bhutan and Nepal, which are not maritime countries, landlocked countries, joined BIMSTEC because they recognize that their markets are towards the south, in Southeast Asia in particular. And to do that, they need to connect through the Bay of Bengal and have access to the ports on the Bay of Bengal in India and Bangladesh. So therefore, there has been sustained, continued political will today across the board, since 1997 in particular, to make BIMSTEC a particularly important platform to correct the connectivity gaps and push for more integration between South and Southeast Asia. Third, we often think of the history of a connectivity as one that is wonderfully developed between integrating markets, steel and coal in the European Union, and then peace evolving, magic peace and conflict disappearing. Let me propose the opposite. There's actually a huge risk when you come together and build connectivity. When you build interdependence, the politics of the choices in the terms of how you build connectivity become very apparent. It's much more peaceful often to live apart, separated from each other, but when you're coming closer to each other, when you develop, proximity with each other, when you're negotiating the terms of trade, Where's the road going to be built? Where's the bridge going to be built? What software are you using for our ports? Where are the air communication channels going to happen? When you're developing that interdependence at the regional sphere, that is when conflict, the risk of conflict increases. My point, therefore, is that as we are now, because of the political will to correct connectivity, as we're all rushing towards correcting disconnectivity, as all these states in the region and states beyond the region, China, the US, Japan, the Europeans, Southeast Asians, everyone is interested in the Bay of Bengal and wants to develop transportation and interdependence connectivity in the Bay of Bengal region. As there's this rush, there's also a growing threat, risk of, politics coming in the way of transportation connectivity. Excessive expectations, pressures, lack of capacity, sometimes even to absorb financing. We talked a lot about the importance of financing infrastructure. I actually see a lot of concern also in the capacity of states and structures in the state to absorb finance and to take viable, sustainable decisions to develop sustainable infrastructure. There's a rush towards connectivity. And as we saw in Africa, just to give you an analogy, there was something we used to call the resource curse, right? For rich oil states that, focus their development just on oil, for example, and then bias their economies to that. I see also the danger of a connectivity curse in the Bay of Bengal region. We need to take very informed, careful decisions and capacitate states and institutions across the Bay of Bengal and the BIMSTEC region to take long-term strategic decisions on where to get financing, on what terms that financing is coming, on sustaining that financing on the ground to implement projects that have long-term viability, and sustain them also through local capacities and local governance structures. So it's much more than just building and financing. It's about sustaining in the long term towards sustainable development in line in particular and, for example, with the Sustainable Development Goals. So therefore, I think as we now see this concern, my last point would be that BIMSTEC, therefore, is not the only way to do this, but one of the most important ways to ensure sustainable long-term transportation connectivity in the region. A regional institution like BIMSTEC is particularly equipped to facilitate these conversations, to endow its member states with capacities to think through transportation strategically with appropriate norms and terms of how to, again, sustain these infrastructure investments and efforts. This has many implications. One is, as we look at these 200 plus projects, infrastructure projects under the master plan that has been adopted, and I think I sense among many member states now a bit of an unease. What do we do with this? We know where we should get to. We have 200 and something projects. We need to develop infrastructure. We have 10 different partners pushing us to do this or that, different possibilities. My suggestion would be, based on the work we've been doing, is that BIMSTEC should be maybe less of an implementer to do big projects and flagship projects, etc. Because it's a relatively weak institution. We heard the Secretary General here today tell us about how long it has taken. 25 years to have a BIMSTEC charter. 25 years for BIMSTEC to finally have 7 directors, 1 for each member state at its secretariat in Dhaka. Now finally, under the Thai chairmanship this year, I just hosted the Director General of the Thai Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Delhi 10 days ago. And it's phenomenal what the Thai chairmanship has been able to do. Basic things like intensity of meetings, frequency of meetings, the basic things a regional institution must do. But it's still a weak organization. Therefore, rather than implementing these big projects, my suggestion is BIMSTEC should be a platform to have these discussions, to develop habits of cooperation, to exchange best practices among the 7 member states, to think about different terms, different norms, different ideas of infrastructure, etc. Some of them have been spelled out here today already. Let me just finish with a few ideas on what those norms would look like. But again, BIMSTEC should be a platform for social sharing of different perceptions, different priorities. Human resources was spoken about, I think, in one of my fellow panelists, about the importance about human resources, capacitation, endowment of different member states. Number one, for example, we need to look much more at developing the regulatory framework of infrastructure. We look at systems, for example. India now has adopted a phenomenal master plan, the Gati Shakti Prime Minister's master plan for connectivity. How do you plug and play with different infrastructure systems? Once you have different physical infrastructures, you need to connect them to different systems, right? To one single system. So again, you have to have, different countries have different standards and systems in managing, monitoring infrastructure. And BIMSTEC would be a particularly good place to have more of these discussions in harmonizing, or at least not fully, but at least creating more coordination habits between these different systems. The motor vehicle agreement was talked about, very important. Rather than just building the roads, how do we ensure that there's going to be a free, unimpeded flow of vehicles, in this case trucks, across the region? Green infrastructure standards. Infrastructure is going to be one of the most important domains where we're going to see climate change play out, in terms of how are you able to develop standards that allow for climate resilient, but also climate green infrastructure to develop in this Bay of Bengal region. Finally, again, coming back to the ASEAN example, we don't have to look at we don't have to look for many ideas. Look at other regions, what they have achieved to bring together these regions through transportation reforms. The open skies policy of ASEAN has done wonders towards ASEAN regionalism. Open skies are essential these days to develop linkages within these regions. I think we have one panelist from Sri Lanka I met yesterday. He arrived with me to the same flight from Delhi. He had to fly via Delhi from Colombo to reach Kolkata because there's no single direct connection between Colombo and Kolkata. We need to develop these basic infrastructure linkages within the region. And that is not only the physical part of it, but the soft side. And again, BIMSTEC is particularly well placed to offer that platform for that cooperation. So let me end then by saying that one, we have a long way to correct the connectivity gaps and the partitions of history that have dismantled connectivity in the region and led us to this dramatic, sad state of affair. Two, I see a tremendous momentum, whether in Delhi, in Kolkata, in Bangkok, in Colombo, in Kathmandu, across the region, in Dhaka in particular, to correct this connectivity gap and also separate the politics from the real importance of building this transportation ecosystem in the Bay of Bengal region. Three, finally, BIMSTEC is not the only, but the most important way to reconnect the Bay of Bengal, and we must therefore empower BIMSTEC to serve not necessarily very high expectations of being an implementer and doing everything. We keep looking to the ADB for solutions. We shouldn't be looking for the ADB for solutions. The ADB is a facilitator who's done a very good job with support of Thailand of developing a master plan. We must look at Dhaka and at the BIMSTEC Secretariat and at the 7 capital states to push this through. They must now come in and implement this in partnership with the Asian Development Bank, with the World Bank, with the AIB, with the NDB, with different institutions across the board. Bring them in, don't keep them out. But I think it's very important for that political initiative now to happen from across different countries. And finally, last but not least, see, BIMSTEC can be, doesn't have to run in the same direction at the same speed. There are different sub-regional dynamics to BIMSTEC. There can be a multi-speed BIMSTEC on transportation. It doesn't make sense to speak about railway connectivity with Sri Lanka very much, right? But it makes very much sense to look at in Bangladesh, India, Thailand, Myanmar, quadrilateral railway connectivity today and correct that missing rail link between South and Southeast Asia. So let BIMSTEC also develop at different speeds and in different directions according to the specific interest of any clusters of the 7 countries within BIMSTEC. Thank you.
Putting it all very neatly together and also cautioning us with regard to the kind of risks that are likely to emanate and therefore the kind of precautions that we need to take. You really given a larger overview of things, and the importance of being able to find solutions which work and which are sustainable, be it in terms of financing, be it in terms of the political economy. So those are things I think we got to be keeping in mind while we take the agenda forward. We have time for question and answers, so I think we will now it's open for questions. Yeah, please. You have a mic there? You have a mic there, or you want to come here? Or you can.
Well, we had a lovely session, and all the speakers have presented some. My question is to our last speaker, Dr. Xavier's.
If you can introduce yourself, that will set the context.
Sorry, I should have introduced myself. I am Sujoy Ghosh from Vidyasagar University, Midnapur. It's in West Bengal. And once again, my question is to Dr. Xavier's. That is, you made an excellent presentation, but on one point I find a little problematic. That is, disconnecting politics from the regular transportation issues. I think the politics is very much a relevant issue in transportation, particularly when it involves India and Bangladesh, because sometimes there are trade-off charges from trading of charges from both the sides. India claims that they are facilitating Bangladesh trade and development. Again, Bangladesh says that it is not India facilitating, rather they are looking for a shortcuts. I think this type of political debates continue there. Therefore, that I wanted to make out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for your question. See, you are technically right that you cannot separate politics from connectivity and transportation. Except that in practice, that's exactly what has happened in the case you mentioned between India and Bangladesh. Delhi and Dhaka have taken a sustained, concerted, strategic position in saying that, there are political issues, there will always be political issues. Humans are political by nature, countries are political, everything's political, but we must not let the politics of the past come in the way of the future of connectivity between both our countries. And if you look at the sea change in the connectivity partnership between India and Bangladesh today, I think it shows not only that the capacity for both leaders in Delhi and Dhaka, both governments, to take this forward, but also the risk they have taken. It's not easy. As you rightly say, political leadership has to set the tone, the vision for strategy. There will be many stakeholders that are, concerned about connectivity. There are many losers to connectivity, whether it's on trade, for example. There will be losers. The politics of trade and the openness of trade of history has always shown that there will be winners, there will be losers. And in fact, often infrastructure projects are often opposed by exactly the people that end up benefiting the most by those infrastructure projects. That's again the paradox of infrastructure development in, if you look at history, right? So my point is, I think we need to continue in a very sustained way to develop the dual track and say, listen, there will be politics, there have always been politics, but the future is contingent on building the basics of transportation, linkages, and connectivity. And what has been achieved between India and Bangladesh over the last few years is simply formidable. And 10 years ago, no one could even expect or imagine that this would have been the state of affairs today. And I think that is also the case in many other countries in the region, where governments are realizing that we must go ahead on connectivity. There will be conflicts internally, externally, there will be opposing forces, but the future is again based on growth, and that is again based on transportation linkages.
Thank you. Yep, please.
This is Pradeep Chattopadhyay from University of Kalyani, West Bengal. I have a question to Dr. Kabir from Bangladesh. You mentioned about financing, and you were talking about going to Asian Development Bank and World Bank and others. But my question is, why not you are talking about some capital from nation states like India, investment of India in Bangladesh, projects in Bangladesh. For instance, you mentioned the 2041 vision document where it is mentioned about blue economy, and there is mention about your expectation from European Union, but not from India per se, like investment from India. So I was thinking that whether BIMSTEC, like BIMSTEC Development Bank, any idea of forging the countries of member states of BIMSTEC to come forward, have an investment pool and go ahead in the implementation of the projects. So that's my question to you. My question to Dr. Xavier is that, yes, in tune with Dr. Ghosh, I was asking that, do you have any sub-regional cooperation which can be a model for BIMSTEC in the way ahead, because you distinguish between regional organization and sub-regional organization. And my question is, given the political backdrop of this sub-regional grouping, can you think of something like Fortress Europe, you know, going free movement of goods and people in any time future? Because that's the benchmark of a good sub-regional grouping. If it has failed in SARC context, can it really be a practice in the context of BIMSTEC? Thank you.
Thank you. I think the question was pretty long, but the reply may be 1 minute from Dr. Kabir and 1 minute from Dr. Xavier.
Thank you. Very important question, and I'd like to thank the Indian government. I mean, for financing in some important infrastructural project in Bangladesh, which includes the rail connectivity between Bangladesh and the northeastern part of India, and also some projects in the energy sector and also in the Mongla port, especially the dredging of the river. So, and also there are other, in fact, the bridge, I would like to mention the Kalni bridge, which has shortened the, the length of, the distance from Dhaka to Kolkata by, I think, some 100 kilometers. So, and these projects are being implemented, and India has a dedicated, credit line for Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is one of the biggest, destination of Indian credit. So, thanks for that, but still, I mean, keeping in mind the, size of the, fund requirement, I think there is a need for external, financing vis-a-vis the Indian financing. So that's important. And also very important, thing that you already mentioned, BIMSTEC Development Bank. So that can be established. So and basically the ADB or other international development organizations, development partners. So these are the members, if we consider the the states, the countries of the BIMSTEC members. So they are already involved. So, and definitely if the fund is required, if the fund is not coming from the external partners, then definitely there might be a separate bank. So that is the thing. And just a few seconds. So the public-private partnership that we are talking about. So the private sector is taking important part in development especially in the special economic zones, some of the special economic zones in Bangladesh. So, and there are some other, infrastructural development projects. So, I think there are some good examples in Bangladesh and other parts of the BIMSTEC countries. So, that can be facilitated. But the thing is that we have to keep in mind that the private sector's investment, requires the, significant, not trivial return. So, and in the part of the states or the development partners, so they have the, grace period and other facilities. So, I think there are some soft areas of the transport connectivity, like, the human resource development and also trade facilitation and ICT development. So, in that areas, I think the private sector can, conveniently take part in the transport connectivity. Thank you.
Xavier, please.
Thank you for the question. I think sub-regional, inter-regional, intra-regional is all very nice academic words. They'll keep me busy, at least some of us busy. See, in the end, if the cat is black or white, as long as it catches the mice, that's what matters. As long as the institution, the mechanism delivers on connectivity, we should go for it. That could be BPIN, could be BIMSTEC, could be various partnerships with ASEAN, it could be different partnerships with Japan, for example, that is very invested in building connectivity in the region with the ADB, etc. But one thing still that is remarkable is that BIMSTEC is an organization that has a functioning permanent secretariat, has now reduced its 14 working groups to 7 consolidated areas, and serves as a platform, as a hub, as a mechanism that must be explored for the exchanges, for an exchange of best practices. So let BIMSTEC be that, call it regional, call it sub-regional, call it inter-regional, whatever you want. But I'll assure you that naturally BIMSTEC will then develop as a stronger, more robust organization for these states to develop the terms and the norms of infrastructure connectivity that they wish for the region, not others. And one last example of why this matters, for example, we just finished a report on connectivity and cooperation in the Bay of Bengal region. We asked 10 scholars from across the region to come up with ideas in different sectors on how connectivity should be fleshed out in the region. They have different recommendations, do it this way, do it that way, etc. But one that is there in all of the 10, we didn't tell them to do that, but naturally I thought it was very interesting. These are scholars from Thailand, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Former Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh, Shahidul Haq, for example, has a wonderful paper on the sub-regional angle in connectivity in Bangladesh's foreign policy. But every of these 10 authors says BIMSTEC is one, if not the most important way for us to flesh out connectivity in this region.
Thank you, Dr. Zania. You have a full book to give a reply to the question, is it? Thank you so much. I think we are running out of time. We would have to do a bit of rationing on questions. 2 questions, I think.
It's very important. There's no doubt about it. We all will have to appreciate. My concern is, it's not a question, it's a comment. Anybody can probably reflect on that. All that we need to keep in our mind is the speed. The way world is changing, we need to keep speed in our mind for all these developments that you have talked about. If that is not kept, then I think we'll lose our way. If it takes 50 years from now, it will be of no use. So that's one thing which we have to all ponder over and deliberate about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. By rationing, I didn't mean no questions. I think we can have a few questions. Yeah, please, sorry. Gentleman in the back. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So I had a simple question that many of the panelists has been describing about the ASEAN also, and BIMSTEC we also have 2 ASEAN nations as well. So we have seen that ASEAN has also faced some of the problems which we are facing today, and all the BIMSTEC members we have known that the governments had a very good relationship. So what can be done, inspiring by the ASEAN members also, that so that we can have a great cooperation within the people on the ground zero level? Thank you so much, sir.
This is for anyone in specific, or you want a general reply? You rightly pointed out that the ASEAN model brought these countries together which were at war, as Dr. Xavier pointed out, at one point of time. And we look at ASEAN as one economic community as a whole. And there are successes, while there are challenges, as you mentioned, which the framework has been able to address rather satisfactorily. And today, when you go from Singapore to any of these nations in the ASEAN neighborhood, you find the movement is seamless, the various kind of conventions and protocols which BIMSTEC is still working on, they have very many things in place. But going forward, the challenges which they face, I suppose, has to be embedded in the kind of risks that can emanate in the future in our thought process while we give a final shape to these agreements that are on the table. So that certainly has to be something which we got to draw our lessons from. If there are any more questions, interesting questions, we take that. Okay, last question, please. Yeah. We have about. Yeah.
Sir, I want to know about the Kaladan multimodal project and IMTD, that is India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral project. So this Kaladan multimodal project was supposed to complete by this year, March, but that was supposed to connect with Mizoram's district, Champai district. But unfortunately, that connectivity project was failed. So in this regard, how BIMSTEC is working, that I was supposed to know from you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you raised a very important thing, and these connectivity projects which have been on the table for some time certainly need to see the light of the day. For projects like this, for example, the Kaladan project, which has a maritime component to it, the terminal at Sitwe and the other things are easy to do and they have been done, and therefore the need is to get that activated and get things moving. The road part of it involves getting the land and other things in place, so there are challenges there. So many of the things possibly have not happened the way it should have, but what has happened, the effort should be to make that work. And today Myanmar does a lot of, say, export of pulses from Myanmar to this part. If you're able to get those things moving out of Sitwe rather than from Rangoon, the work which has been done would get moving. The highway part also, there are gaps here and there, but quite a bit of it is in place, and the reality on the ground in some of the locations have been challenges. And they are important learnings, which I think we got to keep in our mind when we design our future projects so that we are able to do it more effectively. And there, the additional advantage of doing things the maritime way comes in. And I think I'll conclude. I had a presentation on this, but I think we are running out of time now. So I'll just say that thank you for inviting me and all the panelists here. We had a very delightful kind of a discussion, and hopefully with the discussions we had today, the connectivity issues and the kind of work which BIMSTEC has already done in terms of the master plan and the agreement on maritime shipping, will be able to make the whole thing move forward with greater momentum. On the maritime side, the Gati Shakti framework which was mentioned, which we have adopted in India in a big way, where we are able to look at the last mile gaps, the challenge of linkages between various stakeholders to bring them on one platform. Alongside the new Gati Shakti master plan framework, we also have the new logistics policy, which is essentially aimed at reducing the logistics cost from, we say it's about 14% for us, and we want to bring it down to 8%. Now, these two frameworks, which we are working on very actively, could ideally be also a framework which could be a BIMSTEC framework, where if all these projects get seamlessly interlinked, the kind of effort that we have in the logistics policy to bring the cost down would make our industries, our businesses more competitive, which would work in the larger interest of the people in the region. While we design the projects, there would be political compulsions, which the question was raised and answer given. But if you're able to involve all these stakeholders whose interests get served, today we do things in a manner which is inefficient, adds to pollution, adds to cost. There are solutions possible which will avoid all that. And the advantage that accrue to that, from that kind of a solution, if that gets distributed amongst the stakeholders, amongst the businesses, it's a net gain for everyone. And therefore, many of these projects that we identified are projects in that direction. And if you're able to have the business, the stakeholders onboarded, you would be able to build up the right kind of momentum which is required to make these projects take off the ground. The financing has been a challenge, but the kind of ideas that we got on the table in terms of involving the stakeholders, having some kind of a user fee, would ensure that the finances get arranged, the quality is ensured, and these projects go off the block. The digital initiative and greening things we discussed in some manner are things which are necessary ingredients to any connectivity solution that we are looking at. That's the way the world is doing. And the solutions on inland waterways, coastal shipping, maritime shipping are the solutions. and therefore it is not the connectivity issues that get resolved, but also the challenge of climate change and decarbonizing the entire logistics chain that also get addressed. So with those kind of thoughts, we end that session 2 minutes behind time. And I thank you all for a very interesting session, and thank you to all the distinguished panelists and the audience for giving us the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the panelists for a very enriching and thought-provoking session on strengthening regional solidarity through transport connectivity. Now, may I please ask an ISCS official to felicitate the chair with a memento. Thank you. I would also request, please, Dr. Ranjan to please felicitate the speakers with mementos as well. Thank you, Dr. Ranjan. We will now break for lunch and reconvene for the next session sharp at 2:30 p.m. The lunch has been divided to 3 halls. For the speakers, it is at the Mandarin Hall. For participants, at the Portico, and for volunteers, at the Oriental Hall. Thank you.